Hello, my dear students. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Geeta Bansal from Punjab University, Chandigarh. Dear, today we are going to talk on the module communication, its nature, the types of communication, and of course, the barriers to effective communication from the paper Organizational Behavior. After going through the lesson, you should be able to define communication and outline the important functions of communication in the organizations. You'll be able to delineate the process of communication. You'll be able to find out the different methods of communication and the channels of communication. You will develop an understanding of formal and informal communication networks which are being used in the organizations these days. Apart from this, you'll be able to understand the barriers which can impact the effectiveness of communication and, of course, what can be done to overcome it. Before we proceed further, let's have a brief introduction of what communication is. My dear students, in simple words, communication can be understood as evoking of a shared or a common meaning for the persons interacting with each other. Interpersonal communication is of immense significance for everybody interacting in the organizations for the successful achievement of organizational objectives. Unless there is effective communication between the parties, there are chances of breakdown in the whole organizational system. Therefore, it's very important that there are proper channels of communication for the smooth flow of information and knowledge, and the process of communication is followed properly, where the receiver decodes the message in the same meaning as sent by the sender. Now, if the meaning is not interpreted in the same manner, the purpose of communication is defeated and it remains incomplete. Let us try to find out what are the functions of communication. Well, my dear students, communication helps us in motivating our employees. It helps us in expressing our emotions. It helps us in information and knowledge sharing, and it helps us in leading and directing the teams towards effectiveness. Apart from, it helps us in controlling the various situations. My dear students, we are talking about the functions of communication. As managers, you must know what functions does communication take place. Starting with motivating the people in the organization, this is one of the most important tasks of a manager, whereby he motivates his subordinates by sharing information with regard to their performance and telling them the changes required in their contribution by giving them constructive feedback from time to time and motivating them for higher levels of performance. Another function of communication is leading and directing people in the organization. It's again very important to lead your team towards the achievement of the organizational objectives by providing them guidance on various matters from time to time. The managers are supposed to be facilitators for their subordinates and their teams. There are autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire leaders in the organizations who lead according to their leadership styles, depending upon the situations and the level of commitment and competence of their subordinates, which require ample amount of communication between the parties concerned. Another function is controlling the various organizational processes. Now, controlling entails giving out elaborate directions on the rules and regulations to be followed by all the people in the organization. This involves sharing information either in implicit or explicit terms, which requires communication, both written and verbal, and various channels and networks, including formal and informal networking. Another important function of communication is that it enables people to express themselves emotionally. Now, since the organizations have both formal and informal settings, it enables the people to share their professional and personal experiences and concerns with each other, acting as an outlet for emotional expressions, which is very important for the enhancing of the effectiveness and efficiency of the team members and the individuals. And last but not the least, it helps in sharing information and knowledge amongst the individuals and the groups. Since today's organizations are a wonderful pool of diverse workforce coming from different religions, ethnic backgrounds, gender, with diversified experiences, each one equipped with immense source of knowledge and information, it becomes all the more imperative that these cross-functional teams share knowledge and information with each other to bring out the best and contribute towards organizational efficiency. Now, this is possible only if there are open channels of communication between the members and people are open to listening and are receptive to others' ideas, which is a prerequisite for effective communication. Let us try to find out what is the process of communication. Well, the process of communication has ideally 6 steps, starting from ideation to message to encoding to describing the channel to decoding and finally giving the feedback. The ideation process starts with the decision and the underlying reason for communication on the part of the sender and drafting the language of communication. The second step is the message. The message involves the exact content of the information which needs to be imparted to the receiver. The third step is encoding. This stage involves transmitting the message in a peculiar language and format or code which could be easily understood by the receiver. It could be written, verbal, in the picture or icon format, some slang or code word, etc. The fourth step is deciding the channel through which the communication will take place, which can be either through mail, through SMS, through telephone, through Viber, Skype, Hike Messenger, to name a few. The fifth step is decoding, that is, attaching meaning to the information and understanding it in the same perspective as desired by the sender. The sixth step is the feedback. Now, when the person receiving the message gives his answer in affirmation and responds accordingly, it is understood that the message has been received in the same connotation as desired. Let us find out what are the different methods of communication. Well, in a formal organizational setup, there are 2 important methods of communication. One is the oral communication, and the second is the written communication. Now, these 2 methods can be used simultaneously also to reach final decisions and strategies at times. The oral communication. The oral form of communication can be of 2 types. One is it could be verbal and second could be non-verbal. Now, the verbal form of communication is the most used method where almost all the discussions are carried on to reach a consensus on any matter. On the other hand, the non-verbal communication takes place between two or more members, and when they convey their feelings and expressions through their body language, it is called non-verbal communication. Written communication. Well, this type of communication we are all aware of, where the communication is done in black and white format. This is a very formal method which is used to discuss, give, and disseminate information and notices on everything and every matter which is to be recorded and should be made available in all written form or all types for all types of references in the organizations. This is the most common method which is used across the organizations at all levels in the organizations. All right, dear students, let's try to understand the channels of communication and its importance in effective communication in the organizations. Well, the effectiveness of the chosen channel will depend entirely upon how well it is executed, be it oral communication, written communication, non-verbal communication, or through an electronic mode, or it can be through a computer. Some people feel that there is no alternative to face-to-face communication, and they have also found an alternative in video conferencing, where people located across the cities and countries for discussing and sharing information and taking strategic decisions. Now, most of the people are relying on electronic media for faster, quicker, and efficient communication. However, the efficacy of a particular channel can be gauged by its characteristics, which are outlined as below. Now, there are different channels of communication. Let's find out the different channels and their characteristics. First is the channel capacity. This refers to the amount of information that can be transmitted through the channel without much hassle and distortion. Then there is channel modifiability. This refers to the degree of modifications that can be introduced in the channel while the message is in progress or being transmitted. The third is channel duplication. This involves the usage of sub-channels to repeat or elaborate on the message while it is being transmitted. Then we have channel speed. The speed of the message to be transmitted is also of paramount importance in communication. Then there is channel feedback. This refers to the facility of providing feedback along with the communication, thus facilitating two-way communication and easing the mode and producing faster results and conclusions. Then we have channel appropriateness. This refers to choosing the right channel depending upon the suitability of the situation. Before we proceed further, it would be important to understand what are communication networks. Well, the communication networks that takes place between groups of people in the organization formally or informally are called linkages, and the communication network is a series of interconnected linkages. These linkages together connect individuals or groups in the communication process. The types of communication networks can thus be classified as formal communication networks, where the members of the group are formally attached or they indulge into formal communication in their official capacity. On the other hand, in the informal communication networks, the members of a group, they do not communicate in the official capacity, but they are communicating with each other at a very informal or unofficial capacity. The formal communication networks. Now, the formal communication networks can be either in the nature of vertical communication, horizontal communication, or diagonal communication. Now, in the vertical communication, the communication can flow downwards, upwards, or in both the directions. While in the horizontal communication, the communication takes place between people and groups at the same hierarchical level in the organization. In the diagonal communication, which is a peculiar network of communication, the information flows across vertical and horizontal components as well as across hierarchies and boundaries in the organization. Now, let us discuss the different types of formal networks. A simple network, which is used most frequently when vertical communication is required, is like a chain network. Here, there is a possibility of feedback in a chain network where many linkages exist between the sender and the receiver, which might lead to distortions in communication. Slow, but they are accurate and are subject to information overload. Now, the outcome of such networks is slow decision making, but at the same time, the quality of the decisions would depend upon the leader. Another type of formal network is also called a Y network. In this type of network, two people of equal status are positioned either at the top or at the bottom as shown in an inverted Y. Now, this network is better than the chain network in the sense that it is not as slow as the chain and the information flow is not subject to much distortion because fewer linkages are required, but it provides for feedback and the quality of the decision would depend upon the leader. Now, this Y network introduces a measure of centralization with one member having direct access to the other three members. A circle network. Again, this is also a formal network. This network allows each member to communicate directly with other two members. This network leads to better decision making over the Y network and star network as there is greater exchange of information. But at the same time, it suffers from distortions in communication and leads to information overflow for all the members. A wheel network. Now, this is also a formal network. This type of network has the greatest amount of centralization vis-a-vis other networks as the person in the center of the wheel can communicate directly with all the other members. It leads to faster decision making. The dependence on the leader is quite high for ensuring the quality of decisions. Now comes the star network. This is also a formal network. In this type of network, members can communicate directly with each other. This can be considered as one of the best networks as it allows for making very quality decisions with relatively fewer distortions. Now here, the dependence on the leader is also quite less as compared to other networks and information overflow is not an important issue. Now we move on to the informal communication networks, which can take the shape of a grapevine communication, social gatherings communication, and managed by walking around. In the grapevine communication, this type of informal information communication network serves as a foundation for all types of gossips and rumors making rounds in the organizations and is not controlled by the management at all. In the social gatherings communication, these are the social meetings of the organization where certain important events and festivals are celebrated and gives opportunity to the members to bond with each other and their families. In management by walking around, this concept was propagated by Tom Peters and Waterman, where they said that successful management can be practiced only by walking around the premises and not just by sitting in the office. Steve Jobs was known as walking around in Apple all the time, catching up with everyone and everything. And he actually popularized this concept of management by walking around and proved to be quite a fruitful communication network. Now it's time to understand what are the barriers to communication. The barriers to communication can be divided into four parts, that is, barriers relating to intrapersonal factors, barriers relating to interpersonal factors, barriers which could be due to the organization factors, and the barriers which could be there because of the technological factors. The barriers in communication with regard to the interpersonal factors are the ones which arise out of the personality of the individuals that might contribute to act as communication barriers. Now we have learnt about the various barriers that can occur in communication, and it can mar the effectiveness and efficiency of that communication process. Now let us try to understand what are the barriers due to intrapersonal factors, which can occur due to the following reasons. The first reason could be selective perception of the individuals. The second factor could be individual differences in personality, their values, their attitudes, their thinking, their level of motivation, their learning abilities, and of course, their unlearning abilities. All these individual factors together leads to adding different dimensions and meanings to the messages conveyed and acts as a barrier which can be referred to as an intrapersonal factor or an intrapersonal barrier. Now, another factor could be differences in the communication skills of the individuals, which is also a barrier to effective communication. Another important factor which is making waves in organizations these days is individuals' emotional stability, or what we call it as an emotional quotient. And their action and reactions in emotionally charged up situations also affects their communication between the parties and acts as a major barrier in effective intrapersonal communication. Then there could be use of different frame of reference for understanding communication, or it could be the presence of preconceived ideas which affect the interpretation of the whole message itself. The interpersonal factors. Now, the barriers which arise when two or more individuals communicate with each other in the organizational setting, there could be interpersonal barriers. Now, these barriers could occur due to lack of conducive climate for effective and open communication. This could be due to lack of trust between the parties concerned. This could be lack of credibility of the source of information, or this could be due to the lack of interpersonal sensitivity amongst the members. Barriers due to interpersonal factors. Now, there could be an inability of the members to give full attention to the speaker. Then, semantics could be another problem where people tend to give different meanings to the same words. Then there is another term called Chinese whispers, where the communication tends to take new dimensions as it flows through different individuals, obviously owing to nothing else but individual differences. Now, the cultural differences in the diversified workforce of today is another major barrier to effective communication when people fail to understand each other's perspectives with an open and more receptive mind. The barriers relating to the organizational factors could be due to the organizational structure and design, which may facilitate or hamper effective communication. These barriers could be due to the status attached to the position occupied by the person. The hierarchical setup also poses a number of difficulties in communication. The unimaginable size of the working group is also an organizational factor contributing as a barrier. And then the distance between the two employees, which limits or ease their interaction with each other. The technological factors. Now, these are the elements in the medium of communication: its content, the message, the mode of delivery of the message, and the quantity of information to be passed on for effective communication. These barriers could be due to language and its meaning, the information overload for the individuals, the breakdown in the internet system is a major barrier again. Then, too much usage of technology has taken away the personal touch in communication. Sometimes people with whom you are interacting may not be as tech savvy as you are. So, this could be another barrier in communication. Overcoming the barriers to communication. My dear students, it's very important to overcome the various barriers in communication discussed so far. And let's see now how can we deal with it? How can we remove these barriers? One, by setting clearly the goals of communication well in advance, by making use of acceptable jargon and commonplace language, by ensuring the credibility of the senders, by encouraging constructive feedback, by developing a climate of trust and faith amongst the members, by choosing the right channel of communication, by avoiding entering into evaluative judgments, by listening to the entire communication before jumping to conclusions, and finally, by providing feedback from time to time. All right, my dear students, shall we now recall what we have learnt in this module? Okay. We begin by understanding communication per se. Well, communication can be understood as evoking a shared or a common meaning for the persons interacting with each other. Interpersonal communication is of immense significance for everybody interacting in the organization for the successful achievement of the organizational objectives. It nevertheless performs various functions which aids the organizational setting, encompassing motivating people in the organization, leading from the front and directing the teams and the individuals, controlling the various organizational processes enabling people to express themselves emotionally and helps in sharing information and knowledge amongst the individuals and the groups. Well, the process of communication starts with the need for sharing some information with others on the part of the sender, who encodes the message and sends it to the concerned party in the chosen mode and channel, which is, of course, decoded by the receiver in the same meaning and connotation as desired by the sender. The receiver then receives the message and gives the feedback on the same, and thus communication process is concluded. Now, there are two types of communication networks which are the most prevalent in the organizational setup. These are formal communication networks and the informal communication networks. Now, let us try to recall the formal communication and how is it different from the informal communication. Dear, the formal communication can be in the form of either vertical communication, that is, from the boss to the subordinates. It can be a horizontal communication, that is, between two subordinates at the same level, or it can be a diagonal communication cutting across the boundaries in the organizations. Then there are other types of formal networks as well, which can be in the nature of a chain network, a Y network, a circle, a wheel, or a star network. There are so many instances which gives you ample scope and pace to enter into informal communication regarding your personal as well as your personal professional woes. Some of the most common indulgences are in the form of a grapevine. When you meet at the official and personal social gatherings, and when you are moving around in the organizational premises. There are certain communication barriers which could be in the nature of interpersonal barriers, it could be intrapersonal barriers, it could be organizational barriers, or it could relate to technological factors which should be taken care of to ensure the smooth flow of information in the organization. Thank you.